Let's get started on our third week of prompts for Dephemerember with Louisa Heinzel and 49 Dragonflies. Hi everyone, Patty here with my take on the prompts. I go through my journal that I traded with Terry LaRue. We not only traded journals, but we have an elastic band of extra trade pieces we shared with each other. So I looked to see what is tucked away in this elastic band that I could use for my prompt tuck spot and cheese. I find the perfect piece that looks like a jelly print with yellows, oranges, red, and some brown. Perfect, looks like cheese already. I find some hole punches and see what I can do to make this look like Swiss cheese with my holes. My hole punch only goes so far in the page, so my bigger holes will be around the outside. Then I thought if I folded it in half and cut a half circle, I could get a hole more towards the center of the page. That kind of made a wonky circle, but I still change it when we get further along with a tuck spot pull-out page. Then I added my smaller hole punch randomly all over the page. I have two sizes in this type of punch, and I went into the larger circles so I could punch further into the page and get smaller holes all over my page. I pulled out a piece of transparency clear acetate and will use it behind the holes to make a tuck spot. I cut the 8.5 by 11 inch transparency in half. Now I realize I want to make these holes be more of a place to see through and have some words behind the transparency and make the wonky circle an elongated place for a ticket. I got my holes all figured out and take this to my sewing machine and sew around the circles several times and around the edges. I sewed the transparency right to the piece that I had put the holes into. I mark the circles on a page in my journal and use a stencil to add some words to where the circles will end up showing through to the words. Guess I didn't get that portion on camera. I've said before that I purchased from Louisa's Etsy shop these tickets, and I put one in every journal I make. I want this ticket to pull out and have a tab on it to be able to pull it in and out. I auditioned several of the tickets to find which one is larger and would fit into the hole. When you pull the ticket out, you will still have words on the journal page that you can see. I like that feature, not leaving it blank while I have something that pulls out. I glue this to my page, lining up the holes with my words that I have stenciled onto the journal page, making sure not to put any glue in the area of the large circle where I have the pull-out tab with the ticket. Wipe off any excess glue. I added a few clamps to let this dry with my water bottle on top of it and everything else on my desk that would help this dry flat. My ticket needs a piece of cardstock to put on the back of it so that it will be long enough to fit and I can reach it in to pull it out. While I was trying to figure out how to make this idea work with all of the other holes, I didn't want to see the pull-out piece in the other holes. I had to cut a partial circle in the cardstock so I didn't see it in the other hole, and I cut a little of the ticket also to fix it where you don't see it on the other holes. Lined it up with the border showing of the light brown cardstock and glued the ticket to the cardstock. I try it in the opening that I have not put the glue and see how the ticket is going to work. I use a piece of the snippet roll that I used in the fourth prompt snippet roll and woven flowers. I cut a small piece and use it for a tab onto the ticket for my pull-out piece. Fray the edges and glued it onto the cardstock. ready to tackle the next prompt, flip out page and old photos. So I binge watch Louisa and Barbara's videos all the time, and Louisa did one on photos onto sticker paper and then transferring that onto a tea bag. Okay, well, I love this procedure, and I had a few of these pieces left over from working on the project. Some of the color is still on the paper, and it still is sticker paper, so I can use them as stickers. I decided to stamp on them with this long Lupin stamp. It's a Studio Light Lupin Grunge Series stamp, and it is 2 inches by 5.5 inches long. I don't have an acrylic block that big. My stamping is random all over the sticker pieces, and add a few numbers from the Tim Holtz Field Notes series to give the pieces a random stamping. I kept doing this to all of the sticker leftover pieces. Some of the stamping smeared a bit, but I'm going to cut these all up and layer them onto my envelope, so I don't think you'll see it when it's finished. I do this to all of the sticker leftover pieces. I added a little more color to the sticker piece with my handmade inks in copper and rust, along with some alcohol inks in my only 3 colors. This is just dropping some color onto the sticker paper and moving it around with my blender tool. Now to make the envelope. I find a piece of paper that has some ink splattered on it from probably cleaning off my desk and not wanting any of it to go to waste, but it will work fine for my envelope. I fold the 8.5 inch by 11 inch paper in a diagonal to get a square. Yes, I could have just cut it with my corn cutter at 8.5 inches, but I want the diagonal line to be able to fold the corners into it and match them up. I try to make a straight edge with this fold using my grid on my desk. I did this with both sides and then fold up the bottom and fold down the top, and you have the easiest envelope ever. I want the color to be on the outside, not the inside, so I folded it back on itself and put the color on the outside of the envelope. Glued the envelope together at the points and let that dry. I cut my sticker paper up into small pieces to layer them onto the envelope. I inked around the edges of each piece with walnut stain, but it didn't show up enough, so I put the corners onto my archival ink pad in black. Found a place to add it to my journal and decided what cardstock I want to use for the belly band. I went back and watched Louisa's video again on her technique of putting the belly band onto the page, putting the envelope flap into it so it holds the envelope in place. I had put my belly band on the wrong page, but it still works, and I like what I did for the belly band, so I was happy with my outcome, but it wasn't like what she did. Now I just start layering the stickers to the envelope. Cut off any excess sticker paper sticking out over the edge and fill in any gaps that I didn't put the sticker paper down. My embossing machine is in storage, but I had this piece that somehow got in the box to come into the tiny house. that I'm living in, so I was going to use it with the belly band. Cut the brown cardstock to fit the page for the belly band, added a little dyed cheesecloth for texture, and put the embossing piece over the top of that. I like to use a little gilding wax to the embossed piece to help the numbers stand out a bit and give them some depth. Then I added a few more stamps to the belly band so it matches with the theme. Glued the belly band to the page and the cheesecloth to the belly band. Added the embossed numbers over the top of that, but only on two sides so I can use it as a tuck spot also. Now to add the little round disc to hold the envelope in place. I found this letter in an old book I had purchased at a used book sale from our library that puts on an old book sale every couple times a year. It had a picture with it also, and I want to use the letter, which is with the song You Are My Sunshine, with a date on it, and it will be used as my secret love letter for prompt, secret love letter. But I plan on using the picture for the cover of this flip out page for old photo. I used my decal edge cutter to cut the picture out with so it looked more like an old photo. She is gorgeous, I think. Inked the edges and glued her to another piece of white cardstock because old pictures have a white border, and then glued this to the flip out piece. I decided the embossed piece of number was overpowering, so I ripped it off a bit. I used the ripped off pieces to make my little disc with the brad to hold down the envelope to the page. Little more ink around the edge of the ripped off portion. I cut 4 discs or small circles and glued 2 together to make a stronger disc. Ink around the edges. Add a hole to the center and find a small brad to go into the center of each disc. 1 disc will go on the envelope and 1 on the journal page. I added a hole to the corner of the envelope and figure out where I want the disc on the journal page. Wrap the string around the brad and add a little glue to hold it all in place. Put the brad into your hole onto the envelope and the other one onto the journal page. Wrap the string around the brad and add a little glue to hold it all in place. Put the brad into your hole onto the envelope and the other one into the journal page. My brad prongs are showing now on my belly band side, and I want to cover that up. Wrap the string around the disc and the envelope stays in place now. Love this idea. Thanks, Louisa, for such a great project. Plus, this cluster belly band needs something, so I find my little box of clusters and audition a few different pieces to see what will cover up the brad and break up the overpowering embossed numbers. I find 2 different clusters in my box that may work. The long one is nice, but this one seems to work a little better, I think. But is the saying less is better, or is more even better? I tried to add a few more stamped pieces, and for me I went with less is better and opted out of the extra pieces I was trying to add. With this letter, I found it also had this piece of really pretty handwriting on it with the person's name, so I made copies of these pieces and cut out this portion to put into my envelope with Louisa's steps of putting the belly band on the same page as the envelope, dated it with the prompt. I can still add something into the belly band on this side. We'll see what we do later. This next prompt is another reason I'm so far behind in Dephemerember. Mini pocket letter and specimen card. I love making specimen cards and have a couple videos on making them, but this is a whole different level of specimen card. I use my transparency acetate sheets to make my specimen card segments. I ended up making 3 of these, and they are a labor of love, but a week later and I'm still on that same prompt because I'm having so much fun making this one. I thought about just quitting at this point because I fell so far behind, but really, what does it matter? I'm enjoying the process and love making them. So you only need 1 piece of transparency cut in half to make one, or if you're like me, make 3. I made a grid sheet on paper so I could mark the grid onto my transparency sheets. I don't sew straight, and any help I can get to make a straight line helps. After I sew the grid line, I cut my slits on the tops, and then I went back and sewed around the edges and cut the center top open of the grid pattern. Only the 3 down the center were hard to cut this way. This digital set I bought on Etsy and has all these pictures of bottles and flowers and in a grid pattern already. So I printed 2 different designs, front and back, and just started cutting in the size of the grid pattern. I do have to go back and trim each piece down to fit the opening because, as I said, I can't sew a straight line and my pockets didn't turn out all the same size. Now I have a design on the front and the back of my specimen cards, and so that means 2 times the mini clusters I need to make. Who would have known that working mini could be so fun? I printed off all my pages from the digital kit that I bought in tiny size, so all of my bottles were small scale. Then I sat while watching TV and fussy cut out all of these pieces. Another day gone, and I'm still even further behind in Dephemerember. I purchased this perforated paper. It came in 3 different colors, tan, cream, and light brown. I wanted to use it when making my clusters. Plus, I looked through my stash to see what else I had, like mulberry paper and cream, a woven pattern paper, a little lace, thinking that these items might ground each of the bottles that I was going to add to the cluster. It was a challenge on some of the pieces to figure out which direction was up for the cut up pieces. You can't really tell after you add the cluster because not much is showing after that. After I find a pleasing arrangement of tiny little pieces, I glue them down and turn it over and work on the back side of the tiny piece. So this took me another 3 days to finish. I kept telling myself, don't overthink it. Find 3 or 4 pieces and glue them down. But I have to say I got caught up in the process and days went by as I worked on these tiny pieces. But in the end, I love them. I can see putting them into a journal, and you could take them out while you were working in your journal and add them to pages. What a fun interacting piece to add to our journals. So glad I made 3 of these because I see more of them in my future of making. Some of my tiny cards are hard to pull out, so I used a pair of squared off pliers to gently pull them out of the transparency grid sheet. I did ink around each of the rectangular pieces of cardstock with my walnut stain distress ink. I also inked around each of those tiny fussy cut bottles. Yep, I did do it. It helps if you have left a little white edge after cutting them up, and it made them look so vintage and old looking. I have also been collecting during my walk some tiny leaves, pressed them flat and glued them down onto the rectangular specimen pieces. Cut out some words that say specimen and collect from the stamp set Filled Notes by Tim Holtz. I used a lot of glue on these leaves, hoping to keep them from breaking all up. Had to wipe off any excess glue before adding them back into the grid page. These are so fun. I have to decide which one I'm putting into this Dephemerember journal, and the other 2 will go into my tote that I'm putting together for an apothecary journal I'm working on. I want to cut a piece of cardstock to make a border around the specimen sheet that will make it look more like a specimen card. I cut a piece of cardstock to 5.5 by 8.5 and then used my X-Acto knife to cut a 1/2-inch border around the inside of the piece. Now to find a page to add this to my journal. I was going to hinge it with some washi tape, but then decided to cut a rectangle out of a page and glue the specimen piece onto it with the brown frame that I cut out. I traced around the brown frame to get the same size so I could cut it with my X-Acto knife. It was a bit tough with it already bound in the journal, but doable. I glued this all together. I might not be able to get into a couple of the pockets with the way I glued them into the frame, but I still really like the look and plan on making more of these. I added a piece of wax paper to both sides of the page and let it dry. After it had dried, I went back and trimmed any edge that needed trimmed up. I could see a little of the transparency, so I cut that back. Finding a page that will hold my paper brag handle and slow stitching, last prompt for this week. The page I found needed to be reinforced as the paper is a very brittle old book page, so I grabbed a couple extra pieces of book page and glued it down to both sides of the old brittle book page in my journal. After I glued the book pages onto the paper, I decided to give a little gesso over the top of it. I went ahead and did this to both sides of the page with gesso. Added a fern stencil to the gesso page with Distress Oxide ink and Forest Moss Peel Paint Braid Burlap. This is probably one of my first stencils I ever purchased, so I have no idea where I got it because it was a long time ago. I went to my stash of ephemera and found this material that has a bird on it, and it already has stitched around it with a blanket stitch around the edge. Also, I found a paper bag with a twisted handle that I cut off and want to wrap around the bird and then make a branch with the bird to sit on it from the handle. Cleaned up the edges of the handle and tried to form them around the circle. I want to sew these right around the circle. I have several pieces of slow stitching that I like to work on while watching TV, but none of these are going to work with this idea, but they are great to have ready for adding into your journal. Back to trying to sew this paper bag handle to my bird. I used embroidery thread in a brown color to stitch the pieces together. I joined the pieces together with the embroidery thread and stitched the pieces together enough to be able to have something to hold the other handle to. Folded it in half and wrapped it with brown embroidery thread and sewed it to the round bird material piece. It was hard to get the needle through the woven handle. I left a piece unwrapped so I could separate the branch and make it look like a piece of the branch going another direction. I wrapped and sewed this to the circle. Tie a knot on the back to hold the pieces together. Glue the little bird and branch to the fern page. It looks like the bird is on a branch in a tree with all the greenery on the page. Love it! I did glue this so I could use it as a tuck spot if I want to add a tag to it. But for now, this is what I will be happy with. Hope you are having as much fun with these prompts as I am. Next week may be what I'm looking forward to the most because I love everything steampunk, and we have a couple opportunities for creativity to happen, making scraps into treasures. Have a great day. Bye.